Hi. Tonight we're going to talk about forms of real estate ownership. So forms of ownership, how somebody owns something. So the forms of ownership are available or controlled by state law, obviously, and real estate may be held in one of three basic ways. And they include ownership in severalty, so one owner, co-ownership, which would be more than one owner, and ownership by a trust, or property are held for the benefit of another. And most of the time when we buy houses, we're looking at property that would be owned by one owner or more than an owner, because it's a married spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, or friends, more than one owner, or a single owner. The trust, property held for benefit of another, is typically a little more involved, but we'll go through all of that today. So we'll talk about, define and explain the distinction between ownership and severalty and co-ownership. We're going to describe the various forms of co-ownership in real estate, a lot more than you realize that's out there. We're going to describe the key elements of trusts, partnerships, corporations, and LLCs. LLCs, limited liability companies. We talk to people that are investors and say if you're going to be an investor in real estate, you should own your real estate as an LLC if you haven't formed another corporation or something to own it in, so that you can protect your personal assets from anything happening to them that goes bad with that investment. So you would want to own the investment as an LLC to separate it from your other assets. We're going to talk about identifying and describing the types of property ownership for common interest properties as well. Tenants in common. And I'll give you an example of that, how that works. So property in severalty. This property is owned by one individual, corporation, or other entity. So I live in my house by myself. I own my house myself. We would call that severalty. Co-ownership would be ownership by two or more individuals. Again, this is when we're talking about the married spouses or friends or family members together that own a piece of real estate. So it's co-ownership. Forms of co-ownership we can have something called tenancy in common, which is TICS. And a tenancy in common type ownership very often would be more for investment purposes, where there's more than 30 or around 30 owners of a large piece of real estate. They own shares as tenants in common, and they can sell their shares individually without having to sell the actual piece of real estate. They buy in and out of their shares. It's a little difficult to make it work, but there are commercial enterprises where this happens. We have buildings like this in Cincinnati. The building that comes to mind would be a commercial office building that's at the corner of I-71 and 275. There's some white office buildings over in that office park, and one of those buildings is owned as a tenant in common. The problem with the tenancy in common is in order to do anything, everybody has to agree. It takes forever to get work done in a building like that, but it does exist, and it is a form of ownership. And more than anything, it's for investment. Joint tenancy is, again, more than one owner, but they can own it in survivorship and different things like that happens with the joint tenancy. And tenancy by the entireties, would be typically in married couples. And then community property, again, depending upon what state you live in and how they recognize property of spouses, would be whether it's community property state or not. We have trust and business organizations. We have something called living and testamentary trust. This happened when I was in the trust department. A lot of the property that we managed was testamentary trust, which was people that had died already, but the trust held the real estate for the benefit of the family members or people that were involved for the beneficiaries of the trust. Living trusts, typically if people are still alive and they can direct or they can have a company run the entire trust for them. Land trusts, a lot of times we think about green preservation, wildlife trusts, or other trusts or nonprofit organizations that might be land trusts that are owning land for a specific purpose, like I said, for preservation or farming or for wildlife preserve. Business organizations, when they own real estate, they own real estate in a partnership or as a corporation or as a limited liability company. Condominiums, co-ops, and timeshares, again, another form of ownership. Condominium ownership means that you own the property, you get a deed to the property like you would a single-family home. You get all the benefits of mortgage deduction, interest, things like that, like a single-family home in a condominium, but you only really own the unit, the walls inside the unit that are yours. If it's a townhouse, you might own, again, kind of the walls inside that townhouse. But the condominium has common elements, the shared areas, the pool, the community room, the roof, the outside areas are the common elements that are owned by everybody in respective to their share of well, how they own ownership in the condominium. Condominiums sometimes might have right of first refusal if you're going to try to sell. In a co-op, they definitely do have right of first refusal. So if you're going to try to sell, sometimes you can't sell to outsiders. The right of first refusal means that co-op can buy that, or timeshare organization gets the right to buy it back. That way they kind of protect the future of the building or the property and who's going to be involved in ownership. HOA would be the homeowners association. It's very involved with the condos and the timeshare and condo and co-ops. And the HOA is an organization that actually runs the building or the property, but they collect fees from all the owners and interests, so that they can hire somebody or have people run the property. It costs a lot of money to run a big building. In a co-op ownership, it's a little bit different from a condo in the fact that you don't really get a deed. In a co-op ownership, it's an organization or like a company that owns the entire property, and the people who live there are shareholders. So the corporation holds the title to the building, and there are corporate bylaws, much like the condominium bylaws, but the owners have shares of stock. They still do get interest deductions. You can still finance them like you do a condominium. However, in Ohio, that's rare because Ohioans typically don't understand co-op ownership. But the co-op basically is owned by shares of stock. Timeshare ownership, I'm sure there are several of you that are taking the class. Years have gone by where your families might have had a timeshare, and you actually used to go on vacation with family members that had this timeshare. It was the big thing that everybody knew that they were going to go on this vacation every year. They might go to the same exact place year after year, or they could go to different places that were owned by the timeshare company, but they knew that they were buying timeshare for 2 weeks a year, 4 weeks a year, and the timeshare use is kind of like a co-op or condominium ownership. The fact that the mortgage that you take out on it to buy it, you also pay the fees to operate it for those weeks of your ownership interest for the timeshare piece. And that is just a real quick overview of forms of ownership.